Have you ever wondered why some people seem to break through every ceiling placed before them while others remain trapped in the same patterns year after year? Why do certain individuals rise from nothing to build empires, create movements, and change lives while others with every advantage remain stuck in the waiting room of their own potential? There is a moment in every person's life when they first suspect that something invisible is running the show behind the scenes. It happens in the quiet hours of the morning before the world demands your attention. It whispers to you in traffic, in the shower, in that space between falling asleep and dreaming. The suspicion that maybe, just maybe, the biggest obstacle between you and the life you've always wanted isn't your circumstances at all. Not your education, not your bank account, not the people who doubted you, not the opportunities you missed. What if it's something far more intimate and far more terrifying? What if the prison you're trying to escape is made of the very thoughts you believe are keeping you safe? This is the story of a man named Elias. Not a hero, not a genius, not someone born with a silver spoon or a lightning bolt of talent. Elias was ordinary in every measurable way. And that was precisely what made his transformation so extraordinary. This is a story about how successful people think differently. But more than that, it's a story about how thinking differently is the only thing that has ever truly changed anyone's life. Elias was 37 years old. He had a wife named Maya who loved him with a patient, enduring kind of love that he sometimes felt he didn't deserve. He had a daughter named Lily who was 8 years old and possessed the kind of curiosity that made adults uncomfortable because she asked questions they had long ago stopped asking themselves. He had a job at a mid-sized accounting firm where he had worked for 12 years, where he had been passed over for promotion 4 times, and where he sat in a cubicle that smelled faintly of reheated coffee and the quiet desperation of people who had once dreamed bigger. Every morning, Elias woke at 6:15. He would lie in bed for exactly 7 minutes, staring at the ceiling, running through a mental inventory of everything that could go wrong that day. This was not a conscious choice. It was a ritual, an ancient habit carved into his neural pathways over decades of practice. He would think about the emails he hadn't responded to, the project that was behind schedule, the way his boss looked at him with a mixture of pity and mild irritation, the credit card bill that seemed to grow regardless of how carefully they budgeted, the dreams he had abandoned so long ago they had become ghosts he no longer recognized. Then he would get up, shower, dress, and drive 35 minutes through traffic that had become as predictable as his own self-doubt. He would arrive at the office, sit down at his desk, and begin the slow, methodical work of not failing. Not succeeding, mind you. Just not failing. There is a world of difference between the two, and Elias had spent his entire adult life living in that gray space between survival and surrender. Maya would ask him at dinner how his day went. He would say fine. She would ask if anything interesting happened. He would say not really. And they would both pretend that this was what normal looked like, that this was what they had signed up for, that this was the natural trajectory of a life that had once been so full of possibility. But inside Elias, something was growing. A pressure. A quiet rebellion. A voice that had been silenced so long it had almost forgotten how to speak. It started small. A restlessness in his chest when he saw old college friends on social media living lives that seemed charged with meaning. A tightness in his throat when he watched documentaries about people who had risked everything to pursue their passions. A strange, aching loneliness that had nothing to do with the people around him and everything to do with the person he had become. What happens to dreams, Elias wondered, when we stop feeding them? Do they simply wither and die? Or do they transform into something else, something darker, something that haunts us from the shadows of our own minds? He remembered being 22. He had graduated with honors. He had stood on a stage and listened to a commencement speaker talk about the importance of following your passion, of staying true to your values, of building a life that mattered. He had believed every word. He had felt invincible. He had promised himself he would never become one of those people who woke up one day and wondered where all the years had gone. And yet here he was. 15 years later. Wondering exactly that. What Elias didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand in those moments of quiet despair, was that the very thoughts he was thinking were part of a pattern. A loop. An invisible cage built from beliefs he had absorbed so completely they felt like objective truth. He thought he was simply observing reality. He had no idea he was creating it. Let us pause here for a moment and consider what was happening inside Elias's mind. Because understanding this is the first step toward understanding how successful people think differently. Every morning, Elias ran through a mental inventory of everything that could go wrong. This is called confirmation bias, the brain's tendency to seek out and interpret information that confirms what we already believe. Elias believed the world was a dangerous place, that failure was waiting around every corner, that he was one mistake away from disaster. And so his brain dutifully searched for evidence to support that belief. It found it everywhere. In the stern email from a client. In the tightness of his boss's jaw during meetings. In the unexpected expense that threw off the monthly budget. But here's the cruel irony. The same brain that was hunting for danger was also missing something vital. It was missing opportunity. Because you cannot look for danger and opportunity at the same time. You cannot scan for threats and possibilities simultaneously. The brain has to choose. And Elias, like so many people, had unconsciously chosen to prioritize survival over growth. He was so focused on not losing what he had that he couldn't see what he might gain. There is a concept in psychology called learned helplessness. It was discovered by a researcher named Martin Seligman in the 1960s. He found that when animals were exposed to repeated shock and not escape, they actually stopped trying to escape when escape became possible. They had learned, in the deepest sense of the word, that their efforts didn't matter. That they were helpless. Human beings do the same thing. We experience failure, rejection, disappointment. We internalize the lesson that trying doesn't work. We stop making efforts. We settle. We get less than we deserve. We tell ourselves it's just being realistic. And then we call it wisdom. This was Elias. He had been shocked so many times by life that he had forgotten the door was open. He had stopped looking for it. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday with thunder and lightning, not a Tuesday that announced itself with any particular fanfare. Just a Tuesday like any other Tuesday, which is to say it was a Tuesday that would change everything precisely because it started like all the others. Elias had been sitting in his cubicle, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to make sense. Numbers had become meaningless, just ink on paper, just symbols representing something he no longer cared about. And that moment of absolute emptiness, he found himself remembering something. A conversation he had 15 years ago with his grandfather. His grandfather was a man who had lived through wars, poverty, loss, and heartbreak. He had also lived with a kind of joy that seemed into circumstance. Elias had never understood how that was possible. How could a man who had so little be so full of light while Elias, who had so much, felt something? Elias remembered sitting with his garden behind his house. His grandfather was planting tomatoes, his hands covered in soil, his face lined with the geography of a long and difficult life. And Elias, young and arrogant, had asked him, "Grandfather, how do you seem so happy when you've been through so much?" His grandfather laughed. A deep, rolling laugh seemed to come from somewhere ancient. And then he had looked at Elias with eyes that seemed to see right through him. And he said, "Boy, do you know the difference between a prison and a sanctuary?" Elias shook his head. His grandfather picked up a handful of soil and let it run through his fingers. "A prison," he said, "is made of cells as a sanctuary. The difference isn't in the walls. The difference is in whether you believe you can leave." Then his grandfather had said something that Elias had forgotten until that very moment, sitting in his cubicle, surrounded by spreadsheets and fluorescent lights and the quiet smell of failure. He said, Most people build their own thoughts. They lock the door. They swallow the key. And then they spend their lives wondering why they can't escape. But here's the truth, Elias. The door was never locked. It was never in a door. It was just thought. And thought can be changed. Elias sat in his cubicle and felt something crack open inside him. A small fissure in the wall he had built around himself. A sliver of light in a room that had been dark for so long he had forgotten what illumination felt like. He began to ask himself questions he had never dared to ask before. Not comfortable questions. Not safe questions. Dangerous questions. What if I believe myself is wrong? What if the limitations I accept as reality are just stories I've been telling myself for so long I've forgotten their stories? What if success isn't about talent or luck or circumstance? What if it's about something far more accessible and far more terrifying? What if it's about the way I think? This is where the real journey begins. Not with a dramatic change in Elias's circumstances, but with a shift in something far more fundamental. The way he saw the world. The way he saw himself. For weeks, Elias started paying attention to his thoughts. He couldn't change them yet. He couldn't stop them. But he could observe them. He could sit in the back of his own mind and watch the parade of beliefs, assumptions, and fears that had been running the show for so long. He noticed that his first reaction to any opportunity was to find reasons it wouldn't work. He noticed that he automatically assumed other people were smarter, more capable, more living than him. He noticed that he had a habit of predicting failure before he even started. He noticed that he compared his insides to everyone else's outsides and found himself wanting every single time. But he also noticed something else. Something that changed everything. He noticed that these thoughts were not facts. They were habits. Neural pathways that had reinforced over so many years they felt like instinct. But they were not instinct. They were choices. Unconscious choices. Choices that could be made. There is a concept in psychology called neuroplasticity. It is the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to experience. For a long time, scientists believed the brain was fixed, that by adulthood you were stuck with the hardware you had. But we now know that the brain is remarkably adaptable. Every thought you think reshapes your neural pathways. Every belief you hold strengthens certain connections and weakens others. This is both the good news and bad news. The bad news is that if you think the same thoughts every day, you will become trapped in a prison of your own making. The good news is that you can change those thoughts. You can literally rewire your brain. You can build new pathways. You can create new patterns. You can become someone new. Elias began to experiment. Small thing at first. When his brain told him he wasn't capable, he made a conscious effort to find evidence that he was. When he felt the familiar pull toward pessimism, he practiced looking for possibility. When he compared himself to others and felt inadequate, he reminded himself that his turn was different, that comparison was the thief of joy, that the only person he needed to be better than was the person he was yesterday. It was awkward at first. Uncomfortable. Like learning to write with his non-dominant hand. But he kept going. Day after day, week after week. And slowly, almost perceptibly, something began to shift. Let me tell you about the night Elias finally understood what successful will know. The night everything came together in a way that would change his life forever. He was lying in bed, unable to sleep. My mom was beside him, her breathing deep and even. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock in the hallway, a sound he had heard 1,000 times before but never realized. And in that stillness, he found himself thinking about a conversation earlier that day with his colleague, ambitious young woman named Priya, had been at the firm only 3 years and on job partner. Elias had asked her how she stayed so focused, so motivated, so driven in an environment that seemed designed to crush him. And she had something that struck him with the force of revolution. She said, Elias, I don't focus on what I want to achieve. I focus on what I need to become to achieve it. At the time, Elias had nodded politely and changed the subject. But lying in the dark, those words came back to him with the force that made him sit up in bed. Who I need to become. Not what I need to do. Not what I need to have. Not the strategy, the techniques, the tactics, the identity, the self. Elias realized something profound in that moment. Most people approach success after they think about the outcome they want. Money, the recognition, the freedom, the impact. And they try to figure out the actions that will get them those outcomes. But they never examine the identity that drives those actions. And so they remain trapped in the same patterns, the same habit, the same limitations. This is the secret that success people understand. Identity drives behavior. Behavior results. If you want to change your result, you must first change your behavior. If you want to change your behavior, you must first change your identity. And if you want to change your identity, you must first change your beliefs. It was like watching a puzzle into place. All the pieces that had seemed so disconnected suddenly formed a coherent picture. Elias understood now why his New Year's resolutions had all failed. He had been trying to change behavior without changing his identity. He had been trying to be like someone else while still being the same person. You cannot keep the same thoughts and expect different outcomes. You cannot keep the same identity and expect different results. The system is the problem. And the system is the way you think. Elias began to develop his old identity piece by piece. It was not easy. It was not comfortable. It was, in fact, one of the most difficult things he had done. But he had tasted something. A possibility. A glimpse of who he might become. And once you have seen what's possible, it becomes almost impossible to go to the way things were. He started with his mornings. Instead of lying in bed and mentally preparing for failure, he forced himself to think about what he was grateful for. At first, it felt forced and unnatural. He had to literally make lists in his head. 3 things he's grateful for. 3 reasons the day might be good. 3 opportunities he could create. It was like exercise. Awkward at first. Painful even. But he could do it. And over time, it became easier. The neural pathways that bend negative fear and anxiety began to strengthen in directions. His brain was rewiring itself, becoming more efficient at finding possibility, more skilled at creating hope. He also started reading not self-help books, not motivational content. He read biographies of people who had overcome impossible odds. He read about inventors, artists, entrepreneurs, activists. People who had started with nothing and built empires. People who had been told they would never succeed and proven everyone wrong. People who had failed spectacularly and still found the courage to try again. And what Elias discovered in these stories was not a magic formula. It was not a secret system or a hidden trick. It was something far more valuable. It was a pattern. A way of thinking that transcended individual circumstances. These successful people, Elias noticed, all shared. They all saw failure as feedback rather than final verdict. They all had a sense of purpose that went beyond personal gain. They all practiced the ability to delay gratification, to sacrifice immediate pleasure for long-term results. But most importantly, they all had a relationship with their own mind that was different from most people. They treated their thoughts with the same care that a gardener treats his garden. They understood that if you plant weeds, you will get weeds. If you plant flowers, you will get flowers. The mind is not a random collection of thoughts. It is a system. A garden. A workshop. And the quality of your life is determined by the quality of what you plant there. Elias began to notice other differences too. Subtle shifts in the way he approached challenges. When a problem arose at work, instead of feeling overwhelmed, he found himself asking, "What can I learn from this?" Instead of avoiding difficult conversations, he began to see them as opportunities for connection. Instead of staying in his comfort zone, he started to experiment with small acts of courage. And something remarkable happened. The world began to respond differently to him. His boss noticed his new attitude. His colleagues noticed his willingness to help. Maya noticed the lightness in his step, the new energy he brought to their relationship. Even Lily noticed that her father seemed more present, more engaged, more alive. It was a feedback loop. The more he changed the way he thought, the more the world changed around him. And the more the world changed, the more motivated he became to continue his transformation. Success was breeding success. Confidence was breeding confidence. It was the opposite of learned helplessness. It was learned capability. Learned strength. There is a concept called the hedonic treadmill, which suggests that no matter how much we achieve, we tend to return to a baseline level of happiness. But Elias discovered something different. His baseline was shifting. Not because of external achievements, but because of internal growth. He was becoming someone who was naturally more optimistic, more resilient, more capable. The achievements were just reflections of this deeper change, not the cause of it. One evening, Maya asked him what had changed. She could see it in his eyes. She could feel it in the way he held her. She could hear it in his voice when he talked about his day. Elias sat with her on the couch and tried to explain. He said, "I used to think that success was about having the right circumstances. The right job. The right income. The right opportunities. I thought if I could just get those things, I would finally be happy. I thought happiness was at the end of a road I couldn't find. But I was looking at it backwards. Happiness isn't the destination. It's the fuel. When you think differently, you become happier. And when you're happier, you make better decisions. And when you make better decisions, the circumstances change. It's all connected. It all starts with the way you think." Maya looked at him with a mixture of pride and relief. She had been worried about him for so long. She had seen the light in him dimming, year after year. And now, somehow, it was back. Brighter than ever. There is a moment in every transformation when everything you've learned is put to the test. A moment when theory becomes practice. A moment when you discover whether the changes you've made are real or just a temporary shift in mood. For Elias, that moment came when his company announced a round of layoffs. The news hit the office like a bomb. People he had worked with for years were being called into meetings and emerging pale-faced with boxes in their hands. The atmosphere was thick with fear. People were crying in the bathrooms. People were whispering in the hallways. Everyone was terrified of being next. And Elias felt the old fear rising in him. The familiar voice that had controlled him for so long. The voice that whispered, "You're not good enough. You're not important enough. You're going to lose everything. You should have stayed small. You should have stayed safe. You should have kept your head down and not made waves." But this time, something was different. Elias was different. He had been practicing new ways of thinking for months. He had been rewiring his brain. He had been building new neural pathways. And now, when the old fear tried to take hold, he had resources he had never had before. He didn't suppress the fear. He acknowledged it. He respected it. He understood that fear was just his brain trying to protect him. But he also understood that he didn't have to let it run the show. He could acknowledge the fear and still choose a different response. Instead of waiting to be called into a meeting, Elias did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He requested a meeting with his boss. Not to plead for his job. Not to negotiate severance. But to offer a solution. He had been thinking for weeks about how the company could improve its efficiency, cut costs, and increase revenue. He had been sitting on these ideas, afraid to share them, afraid to stand out, afraid to risk rejection. But now, with everything on the line, he decided to speak up. He walked into his boss's office and laid out his ideas. Not as a desperate plea to save his job, but as a contribution from someone who cared about the organization's success. He spoke with confidence. He spoke with conviction. He spoke like someone who knew his value. His boss listened. And then he did something unexpected. He said, "Elias, I've been watching you for the past few months. Something has changed in you. I don't know what it is, but I like it. These ideas are good. Very good. I want you to lead this initiative. If it works, we won't need layoffs. If it works, you won't just keep your job. You'll be promoted." Elias felt the old self, the self that would have doubted, questioned, minimized. He felt the old self rise up and try to take control. But he was no longer that person. He had become someone else. And this new person, this transformed person, simply said, "Thank you. I won't let you down." The initiative was a success. Not overnight. It took months of hard work, of long hours, of setbacks and adjustments. But Elias had learned something that would serve him for the rest of his life. He had learned that the only way to fail is to stop trying. He had learned that every obstacle is an opportunity in disguise. He had learned that the person you become in the process of pursuing success is more valuable than the success itself. But more than that, Elias had learned the fundamental truth that separates successful people from everyone else. It's not talent. It's not luck. It's not connections or resources or circumstances. It's the way they think. Successful people think in terms of possibility rather than limitation. They think in terms of growth rather than safety. They think in terms of contribution rather than consumption. They think in terms of purpose rather than comfort. And here's the thing that might surprise you. These ways of thinking are not innate. They are not genetic. They are not reserved for a special class of people born with some magical ability. They are skills. Skills that can be learned. Skills that can be developed. Skills that can be mastered by anyone willing to put in the work. Elias was living proof. He was ordinary in every way. He had no special advantages. He had no unique talents. He had nothing except a willingness to change his mind. And that willingness changed everything. The year after his promotion, Elias stood on a stage. Not a big stage. Not a famous stage. A small stage at a company event. But to Elias, it might as well have been the main stage at the world's largest conference. Because what he had to say was important. Not to the world, perhaps, but to the people in that room. People who were where he had been. People who were trapped in the same invisible prison he had escaped. He looked out at the faces in the audience. He saw the familiar tightness in their jaws. The worry in their eyes. The quiet resignation that comes from years of thinking small thoughts. And he felt a surge of compassion for them. He had been there. He knew exactly what it felt like to be so close to your own potential and yet unable to reach it. He spoke to them about what he had learned. Not the strategies or the techniques. Not the tactics or the systems. He spoke to them about something far more important. He spoke to them about the way they thought. He said, I used to believe that success was something that happened to other people. I used to believe that I was somehow deficient, that I didn't have what it takes, that I was destined for a life of quiet mediocrity. And you know what? I was right. I was absolutely right. Because what I believed about myself became true. Not because I was psychic. But because my beliefs shaped my behavior. And my behavior shaped my results. He paused. He let the silence fill the room. But then something changed. I realized that my beliefs were not facts. They were choices. Unconscious choices, yes. But choices nonetheless. And I realized that if I had chosen to believe I was limited, I could choose to believe I was capable. If I had chosen to see obstacles, I could choose to see opportunities. If I had chosen to live in fear, I could choose to live in courage. He looked out at the faces. Some were skeptical. Some were hopeful. Some were still trapped, still searching, still waiting for permission. He said, the only permission you need is the permission you give yourself. The only belief that matters is the belief you hold about yourself. The only limit that is real is the limit you accept as real. Everything else is just noise. Elias's story doesn't end with a fairy tale finish. He didn't become a billionaire. He didn't change the world. He didn't achieve fame or recognition beyond his small circle. But that's not the point. The point is that he became someone. Someone who was fully alive. Someone who was contributing. Someone who was growing. Someone who was at peace with his own life. The transformation that happened in Elias is possible for everyone. Not because everyone will become a CEO or a millionaire. But because everyone can become more of who they were meant to be. Everyone can break free from the invisible prison of limited thinking. Everyone can choose to think differently. And this is what successful people understand. This is the secret that they carry with them, not as a badge of honor, but as a daily practice. They know that their greatest asset is not their bank account or their network or their talents. Their greatest asset is their mind. And they treat it as such. They invest in it. They protect it. They nurture it. They grow it. They understand that thoughts become words. Words become actions. Actions become habits. Habits become character. Character becomes destiny. Everything starts with a thought. And that thought is a choice. So here we are. At the end of the story. But the story isn't really over, is it? Because you are now at a crossroads. A moment of decision. A moment of possibility. You have seen how Elias broke free from his prison. You have seen how he changed his thinking and changed his life. You have seen how the invisible walls of limitation are made of nothing more than thoughts that can be changed. And now you are faced with a question. A question that will determine the trajectory of your life. A question that matters more than any other question you will ever face. The question is this: will you choose to think differently? Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not when you have more time, more resources, more confidence. Right now. In this moment. Will you choose to think differently? Because here's what I want you to understand. The thoughts you think today become the beliefs you hold tomorrow. The beliefs you hold tomorrow become the actions you take next week. The actions you take next week become the habits you cultivate next month. The habits you cultivate next month become the character you develop next year. And the character you develop next year becomes the destiny you live for the rest of your life. It all starts with a thought. A choice. A decision to see the world differently. A decision to see yourself differently. And that decision is available to you right now. In this moment. In the space between one thought and the next. In the space between what you were and what you could become. Potential is never lost because of a lack of talent. It is lost one excuse at a time. One postponed dream at a time. One comfortable day after another. The life you want is waiting. Not for a better version of you. Not for a more convenient time. Not for the perfect conditions. But for the decision you make today. The decision to think differently. The decision to believe in possibility. The decision to become someone new. You have been given the greatest gift any person can receive. The gift of choice. The gift of consciousness. The gift of the power to shape your own mind. What you do with that gift is up to you. But know this. The prison you feel trapped in was built by your own thoughts. And it can be demolished by your own thoughts. The limitations you feel held back by were created by your own beliefs. And they can be replaced by new beliefs. This is not wishful thinking. This is not motivational platitude. This is the most practical, most powerful, most life-changing truth I have ever encountered. The way you think determines the life you live. And the way you think can be changed. By you. Starting now. So here is my challenge to you. Don't just close this video and go back to your life. Don't just nod your head and then forget everything you've heard. Do something. Something small. Something meaningful. Something that shows your brain that you're serious about change. Take one belief that's been holding you back and question it. Just question it. Ask yourself, is this really true? Is this absolutely true? What if it's not true? What would I do if I believed something different? And then take one action that reflects a new belief. One action that moves you toward the person you want to become. One action that breaks the pattern. One action that proves to yourself that you are serious about change. Because change doesn't happen in the abstract. Change happens in the concrete. It happens in the choices you make moment by moment. It happens in the thoughts you choose to think. It happens in the identity you decide to embody. And it starts right now. With you. And your next thought. And the choice you make about what that thought will be. The world is full of people who talk about change. Who dream about change. Who hope for change. But the people who actually change are the ones who decide to think differently. The ones who understand that everything they want is waiting for them on the other side of their own mind. The ones who are willing to do the work, not just once, but every single day, to build a new way of thinking, a new way of being, a new way of living. You have the power to be one of those people. You always have. You always will. The question is, will you use it? The answer is waiting. Inside you. Right now. In this moment. Choose wisely. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, the only difference between where you are and where you want to be is the way you think. Change your thoughts. Change your life. You have everything you need. Right now. In this moment. The only thing standing between you and your potential is the decision to believe in yourself. And that decision is yours alone to make.